So now we come to meditation, section 17. So sometimes we don't always have time to study this chapter directly, this section directly, but I really encourage you to have a look at it. Because what Sangharakshita is doing here is he's giving us an overview of what meditation practice is about, what we're trying to cultivate, and where it's leading. So he's really giving us a whole overview of meditation. And as such, it's very important chapter. You know, so often we come to a Buddhist centre with a vague notion that meditation might be good for us. And we start to meditate and we're not even quite sure about why. Maybe to relax or to gain more control over our mental states. But this chapter is really going into where meditation can lead us. So it's good to read this section and ask yourself, well, what am I doing when I meditate? What's the purpose of meditation? What am I looking for in my meditation? And what makes an effective meditation? So it's a real opportunity to allow us to reflect on what we're actually doing when we meditate and what are we doing it for. So Sangharakshita looks at the two meanings of the word samadhi. Like meditation, it has a lot of different meanings depending on the context. So on the one sense, it can mean concentration and one-pointedness. Or it can mean a whole overview of the practice of meditation as well. So he's going to go into all those different meanings of the word samadhi. And first of all, he makes the point that samadhi can be, or one-pointedness can be achieved on the basis of unskillful mental states as well as skillful mental states. But if you achieve samadhi on the basis, or one-pointedness on the basis of unskillful mental states, it doesn't go very far. So that might be worth thinking about. I suppose I always imagine a ninja or a samurai, someone who's very, very concentrated, but from an unskillful end. So when Sangharakshita is talking about samadhi, he's always talking about samadhi in the sense of being based on a skillful mental state. So he talks first of all about mindfulness and self-possession. And really, I think it's interesting because in this section, what he's doing is he's evoking mindfulness and what the purpose of mindfulness really is. He's saying that normally we're impulsive. And so to practice mindfulness, what we're doing is we're allowing a kind of gap or some space between our initial impulse and our action, and that's why it's very much tied up with skillful action. Because in order to act skillfully, we must have some mindfulness about what we're doing. We must introduce a pause between impulse and action, where we can act creatively. But more than that, he evokes it as a way to make all action sacred. Sometimes the ideal of mindfulness can be presented as someone very still and very calm and very quiet, also very slow. And that's part of it, but there's also this aspect to it which is allowing us to maintain a movement of mindfulness throughout all our activities, an uninterrupted current, even in dreams, in all our activities, even in dreams, that removes the distinction between the sacred and profane. And that's what we're really doing when we practice mindfulness. We're allowing all our actions, all our movements, all our thoughts to move into the sacred. So I don't know about you, but that encourages me to practice mindfulness. And it's also worth thinking about when I'm practicing mindfulness, where's the sacred in this? And allowing that to come to the fore. The second aspect of samadhi that he talks about is contentment. And saying, well, it's much easier to be content if you are living a simple life. So if you are amassing a lot of possessions, it means that you're discontented with poverty. And because you're discontented with poverty, you're not content. And you can see this in your own life. Once you get money, it doesn't mean that, all our problems are over necessarily, because it introduces a thought, I could get more. So there is a relation between amassing wealth and contentment, but theoretically, one should be able to be content with whatever we've got. And of course, most of us have got quite a lot, and definitely adequate in which to live. So it's looking for that quality of contentment in what we have and in what we own and in the way that we lead our life. He also talks about the hindrances, going forth from the hindrances, and quotes in full some of the Pali passages about this. We've got desire for sensory experience, kamachanda, which is a bit compared to being like water that's swirling with coloured dye. You can't see your face in the water because you're entranced by the movements within in the water. So you're not looking at reality itself. You're looking at these distractions, and you're absorbed in the distractions instead. And in the Pali text, it talks about how to move beyond this. It says moving to being free from lust, which sounds quite bald, but I think we can get into a state where we long to be free from entrancement, let us say. We long to be free from a mind that's constantly distracted, and we long to be content with what we actually have. The next hindrance is hatred, which is compared to being like seeing your face in water that's boiling, bubbling up. I'm sure we're all familiar with that state of mind. And the remedy for this is to cultivate love and compassion. The third hindrance, as you know, is sloth and torpor, which is compared to being like water clogged with weeds. It's kind of heavy, it's hard to move in, there's a kind of turgidness to it. And in this one, it's interesting because the remedy is to love the light, cultivating a watchful mind, clear comprehension. So again, it's looking for the quality of light within our experience, looking to even love the light, love comprehension, clear comprehension, and a watchful mind, and really value those little glimpses kind of beyond the turgidness that introduce some clarity and light. Then we've got restlessness and anxiety. Restlessness and anxiety is compared to being like water whipped up in waves. It hasn't got a single focus. It's here, there, attention goes here, there, and everywhere. And it says that the remedy for this is to cultivate a heart full of peace and a mind undisturbed. So again, really valuing the quality of peace within our experience and focusing on that whenever it arises. I think as I get older, I definitely love the quality of peace more. I think when I was younger, I found it a bit boring, but peace has its own vibrant quality. So that's what we're looking for as a remedy for restlessness and anxiety. Peace in the body and peace in the mind, peace in the heart. And then we've got doubt. I think this is the hardest of all the hindrances to really move beyond. It's compared to being like water filled with mud. We can't see to the bottom. And the remedy for this is to develop confidence in the good, to really reflect on the Buddha and the Buddha's disciple, to reflect on the teachings themselves, and to gain confidence that actually it is possible. It is possible to develop on the spiritual path. And then we come to the classical objects of concentration, establishing concentration, using these 10 objects of concentration, which are called place of work. I think sometimes we don't really like the idea of meditation being work, but maybe we could think of it as a work that we're really enjoying. There's nothing so satisfying, actually, as doing some work that you're really wholeheartedly enjoying. It's a very, very satisfying experience, and that's what meditation can be like. So we've got the 10 devices. Some of those are about the colours, and of course this got taken up by Tantric Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, where you're focusing on the elements and on colours. But Sangharakshita says those that have deep philosophical significance and profound emotional appeal. So we're using those colour, light, the elements to take us further into concentration, but also to help us understand reality, take us towards reality itself. We've got the 10 impurities, and Sangharakshita talks about those as the stages of the rotting corpse, not as a kind of morbid fixation, but as a way to really loosen the bonds to samsara, and taking a kind of interested involvement in the process of death, because of course we are all going to die, and so are those that are close to us, and it's really helping us remove the fear that comes with death. We've also got the 10 recollections, including the mindfulness of breathing, but also reflecting, for example, on the Buddha. And Sangharakshita talks about the mindfulness of breathing. He gets quite excited about the new Burmese method. I think partly because it's experimental and new, and it's the Sangha really trying to cover new ground in meditation and make meditation practice really alive. I think often he was quite disappointed in the monks that he met that they weren't really grappling with meditation, really making that practice alive. So here's a new method which was experimental, that was taking the Sangha somewhere new, and he was very pleased to see that development. Later on, he saw that there were some problems associated with the new Burmese method, which he then termed alienated awareness. And he gave a talk about alienated awareness, which he said can cause people quite serious mental health problems. And it's where you're aware of, for example, the body and the movements without involving in your emotional life. So Sangharakshita really saw that one needs to, in mindfulness, involve the whole being, body and the movements, as well as feelings and volitions, and take a wholehearted approach to awareness. There's the Brahma Viharas, which we're all, I'm sure, familiar, particularly the Metta Bhavana, based in Metta Bhavana. And Bhante distinguishes that quite strongly from Pema, from sticky attachment, really emphasising the qualities of friendliness in the Metta Bhavana. And it's interesting because he does point out, and I think sometimes we lose this, he points out that there's the initial intensification or internal intensification, which really means establishing metta or the Brahma Viharas within ourselves. And then there's the stage of radiation. And in Living with Kindness, Sangharakshita talks about this as being not that metta moves within our consciousness, but that our consciousness moves within metta. Metta is the medium in which consciousness moves. So I think it's really important in the practice of the Brahma Viharas that we allow a stage of just radiation outwards of the Brahma Viharas in all directions, without boundary and without even a central point. If you like, you could imagine it as just sitting in meditation, in the Brahma Viharas, being metta, radiating metta. There's concentration on the 4 formless spheres, which he goes into a bit later. The loathsomeness of food, which I think will probably be quite problematic in our culture. And analysis of the 4 elements. Of course, we do the 6 element practice on our ordination retreats and after ordination. I think what's interesting to notice about all these sort of supports of concentration, these places of work, is that they don't always necessarily lead to the higher dhyanas. Sometimes they're said to lead to the neighbourhood concentration, sometimes first dhyana. They're not supposed to all lead us into the formless dhyanas. And I think it's a mistake sometimes if we take up a reflective practice to think, well, I should be getting in dhyana, but I'm not. It's okay, because some practices are reflection practices. They change us. They change the momentum of our being. Even they develop insight. They're not necessarily all going to lead us to dhyana. And in a way, the next stage of this chapter explains why, because you've got degrees and kinds of concentration, where there's an external image which by degrees is internalized. And I think there is a process of that within the Pali scriptures where you take an object of concentration and then you internalize it, you make it vivid within your own mind, your own consciousness, and then you let go of the object. And that's when samadhi, in the sense of concentration, and the higher states of concentration can really emerge, when we let go of the object, which is why just sitting is so important after we use objects of concentration, to just sit, to just allow the mind to, in a way, keep going with its own process once we've established perhaps neighbourhood concentration. So yes, then he comes into the dhyanas and what they are. The exact definition is to think over and brood upon, which sounds like, it reminds me of Yeats actually, where Bhante quotes this somewhere. Yeats says, wisdom is a butterfly, not a gloomy bird of prey. So we shouldn't allow our concentration to brood in the sense of a kind of gloomy bird of prey, but more in the sense of a kind of delighted interest. And each of these dhyanas has its own quality. We can look as the dhyanas in terms of the full set, as it were, and going through the full set. And I know this is really important to some people because maybe, you've been in states of higher concentration and not really known what that was. So here's a map telling you what is possible for the mind. And what one might experience as one develops concentration. In a way, yes, there's the 4 dhyanas, or the 8 and the 4 formless dhyanas. But really, they're really describing a process, not kind of 4 or 8 distinct things, if you see, or distinct stages. They're describing a process in the mind. So in the first dhyana, we have thinking of and thinking about. We've got rapture, or piti, and bliss, sukha. And in the second dhyana, the thinking of and the thinking about, so that's subtle thought, being able to bring something to mind and dwell upon it, those kind of fade away. That sort of process of thinking fades away. So we're just left with concentration, one-pointedness, and thinking, and rapture and bliss. But in the third dhyana, the kind of grosser expressions of rapture fade away, and we're just left with that bliss, which is described as like being permeated with water. And then in the fourth dhyana, the bliss turns into equanimity. So you have concentration and equanimity. So it's a process of it's really a process of integration of mind. And of course, we've got those similes. In the first dhyana, it's like soap powder being mixed. We don't really use soap powder in this culture very much anymore, but what we do use is custard powder. And I think it's a bit like, if you get the right amount of milk to powder, I'm hoping you're with me in this, or corn powder, maybe not custard powder, but corn powder. You get just the right amount of milk or water to corn powder, and corn flour or custard powder. And it completely absorbs the liquid to such a point that's very, very satisfying. There's no liquid left over. And there's this very smooth consistency. So you're not to take these too literally, but that's kind of what it feels like. There's a sense of ease and integration. And in the second stage, it's like this kind of clear water coming up into the lake, a bubbling up of inspiration, of something new and bright and clear and cool. Bhante talks about it. He says there bubbles up from the depths of the pure and translucent mind something even purer, active and dynamic. He says it's a bit like the first dhyana is a bit like being in the state of a truly integrated human being. And then the second state of dhyana, the second stage of dhyana, is like being an artist, creative and artistic. He says it's the stage of inspiration. And then, of course, we come to the third dhyana, which is compared to being like a lotus, fully immersed in the water, permeated by the water. And Bhante says this is permeation by the higher consciousness and containment within it, so that you feel you are in your natural element. So you're completely suffused, completely in your natural element. There's no reason to go anywhere or do anything else. It's a very whole experience. And he calls this permeation and says it's like the state of a mystic. And in the fourth dhyana, it's like being wrapped in a cool sheet. So at this stage, you've got protection and insulation from the outside world by higher states of concentration or higher states of consciousness. So you can move through the world protected. In a way, the higher states of consciousness have got you, are holding you, and you move within them. This is the state of radiation, Bhante says. He says it's the state of the magician. Now, hearing about the dhyanas can have two effects. Some people find that a bit of a relief to hear about because they've accessed those states of mind and they seek to understand them. For some people, it can be a bit off-putting. They feel perhaps that they don't measure up to those states of consciousness. So within meditation itself, I think what can be very helpful with the dhyanas is not necessarily to feel like one needs to sort of clock them up, as it were, but that one can look for those, in a way, the dhyana factors within one's meditation and allow those dhyana factors to take one deeper. So we've got the state of one-pointedness. We've got a state of subtle thought. We've got the experience of rapture, of pity in the body. You can really feel that sense of energy moving throughout the body. We've got the state of bliss, which is a kind of inner happiness and joy that doesn't arise from external stimulation. And we also have the quality of equanimity. And of course, not forgetting that those dhyana factors are said to be suffusing the whole body. So I think it can be very helpful to look for those factors within one's experience and to enjoy them. You know, really the dhyanas, if you hear the descriptions, are very enjoyable states of mind. They give one energy and peace and encouragement to go deeper into the path. They enable us to have the kind of basis of happiness and joy in which to, and one-pointedness in which to reflect on the Dharma. And also to live a good life, a happy life where we're not craving for external things to bring us satisfaction. In a way, what Dharma Dinner of the Pali Canon said, she said that the dhyanas give us pleasure in our lives without stimulating craving. So I think something to talk about in our groups is, whether we've had any experience of those dhyana factors and whether that's helpful to us, both in our meditation practice and allowing our meditation to go deeper, but also in our lives. And then we've got a choice. We either, he says there's a fork in the road. We either go back to neighbourhood concentration, which is when we're, in a way we've got enough. There's thought, but it's directed. It's directed thought that is quite subtle and malleable. And with that directed thought, we can reflect on the nature of dukkha, which leads us to the wishless samadhi. We can reflect on impermanence, which leads us to the signless samadhi, or we can reflect on no self, which leads us to shunyata samadhi. And yeah, that's something we could talk about in the groups, really getting a taste of what those states are like. Because Bhante really goes into these as doors to liberation, which we'll look at when we look at the 3 lakshanas. He also adds to that list reflection on Ashubha, the unbeautiful, which leads us to the liberation of the beautiful. So in preparation for the next section as well, I think it's really important to read one of his last papers, which was on the 4th lakshana, what he terms a 4th lakshana, and how that can lead one to this samadhi of the beautiful, Shubha, the gateway to liberation, the doorway to liberation, which is the beautiful. So yes, so that's one direction that we can go. Or we can go into the arupa dhyanas. So this is the higher states of concentration that's particularly developed, but is pre-Buddhist, and is common to both the Buddhist meditative path, but also the Hindu meditative path. It's kind of the state of a yogi, really. Where you've got the sphere of infinite space. So if you enter into these states of concentration, and you might have glimpses of this already, you feel as if you're part of an infinite space all around. There's this sense of freedom from obscurations, openness. Bhante says it's a feeling of freedom and expansion, an experience of one's whole being expanding indefinitely. And then you can move from that, where you realize it's not just that you're surrounded by space, but space is mind. There's no outer thing that's called space. It's actually just awareness in all directions. And Sangharakshita says, extending in all directions, but not from any one particular point, consciousness is present everywhere. And as you do this, there's nothing that you want to pick up on, or there's nothing that's separate from your experience, or in a way kind of bifurcated out of your awareness. Bhante says one cannot pick out any one thing in particular as distinct from any other thing. And through that, you then enter into the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. He says one is not fully beyond subject and object, but one can no longer think or experience in terms of subject and object. So, one's moving to a very high state of consciousness, but of course, from the Buddhist point of view, it's still not enough, because when one leaves that state of mind, you haven't broken through greed, hatred, and delusion. Which is, of course, what the Buddha saw when he cultivated these states of mind with his 2 teachers before his enlightenment. So, yes, in dependence on the dhyanas, you can go into the formless dhyanas, or you can go into the more magical supernormal powers, which he describes, and they sound fantastic. But of course, it's really the supernormal power, which is the destruction of the ashavas, the poisons, that's really important to us as Buddhists. The destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. And really, that's the most, that's what he says is the greatest miracle of them all. And of course, that's the true purpose of meditation.